11,600 years ago, in the arid hills of southeastern Turkey, someone built something that should not exist. Massive T-shaped pillars, some standing 18 feet tall and weighing 50 tons, carved with intricate precision and arranged in perfect astronomical alignment. The people who built this, according to everything we know about human history, were nomadic hunter-gatherers with no metal tools, no agriculture, no written language, and no business constructing anything more permanent than a campfire. For 30 years, archaeologists have excavated Göbekli Tepe, measured it, cataloged it, and struggled to explain it. They have not succeeded. In 2026, Grok AI was fed every scan, every survey, and every analysis ever conducted on the site. 30 years of research, processed without preconceptions, without disciplinary boundaries, without career consequences for reaching uncomfortable conclusions. What it found has left the scientific establishment in silence. This is what the evidence actually shows. In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd noticed something unusual protruding from the dry soil of a hilltop near Şanlıurfa in southeastern Turkey. He reported it. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt investigated. What Schmidt found when he began systematic excavation the following year would consume the remaining 2 decades of his life and permanently destabilize everything archaeology thought it understood about the origins of human civilization. The site is called Göbekli Tepe, Hill of the Navel in Turkish. It sits on a limestone plateau, deliberately positioned at the highest point of a mountain ridge, visible for miles in every direction. And what lies beneath that plateau has no satisfactory explanation. At least 20 stone circles have been identified, each featuring massive T-shaped limestone monoliths arranged in carefully planned rings. These are not crude slabs dragged into rough formation. They are precisely carved pillars, shaped to consistent geometric tolerances, some standing 18 feet tall, some weighing 50 tons. They are decorated with intricate relief carvings executed with a level of skill and control that takes the breath away even now. Animals rendered in vivid, dynamic detail: foxes, lions, vultures, scorpions, snakes, bulls. Geometric patterns of interlocking shapes, abstract symbols whose meaning has resisted 3 decades of analysis. And on the largest central pillars, something more disturbing still. Carved arms running down the sides, hands meeting at the front. These pillars are not abstract monuments. They are stylized human figures. Something is depicted standing at the center of these circles, watching, waiting, recording. The conventional explanation, the one taught in universities and printed in textbooks, goes like this. Nomadic hunter-gatherer bands, perhaps motivated by emerging religious impulses, periodically converged on this hilltop from surrounding regions. Using stone tools, they quarried these massive limestone pillars from bedrock outcroppings nearby. They transported them to the construction site. They erected them in precisely planned circular arrangements. They maintained the site across centuries, adding new enclosures, expanding the complex. Then, around 8000 BCE, for reasons that remain genuinely mysterious, they deliberately buried the entire complex under thousands of tons of carefully placed fill dirt, preserving it in extraordinary condition for modern discovery. The narrative presents Göbekli Tepe as the birthplace of organized religion, the spark that ignited civilization, the moment when human beings first coordinated themselves around something larger than immediate survival. It is a compelling story. It has one serious problem. The engineering does not work. Even with modern heavy equipment, quarrying, transporting, and erecting a 50-ton carved limestone monolith is a significant undertaking requiring careful planning, substantial machinery, and considerable expertise. Now remove the machinery, remove the metal cutting tools, remove the wheeled vehicles, remove the domesticated animals that might provide hauling power. You are left with human muscle, stone implements, and whatever wooden or rope technology Neolithic people possessed. Experimental archaeology has tried repeatedly to replicate what was achieved at Göbekli Tepe using only period-appropriate tools and methods. teams have managed to rough out basic shapes in limestone using stone hammers and antler picks. They have moved modest weights using sledges and rollers. What they have not managed is anything approaching the surface finish, the geometric precision, or the detailed relief carving visible on the original pillars. The gap between what stone tools demonstrably achieve and what Göbekli Tepe actually shows is not a small discrepancy to be explained away. It is a chasm, and the construction technique is only the beginning of what does not fit. Because when Grok AI was given the complete data set from 30 years of research on this site, the engineering anomaly turned out to be the least surprising thing it found. In 2026, researchers assembled the most comprehensive dataset ever compiled on a single archaeological site. Every three-dimensional scan ever taken of Göbekli Tepe's pillars and enclosures. Every ground-penetrating radar survey of the surrounding plateau. Every astronomical analysis of the site's orientations and alignments. Every catalog of carved symbols, every geological study, every comparative analysis linking Göbekli Tepe to related sites across the region. 30 years of intensive research from dozens of independent teams across multiple disciplines, unified into a single data set and fed into Grok's neural networks. The directive was precise. Analyze all available Göbekli Tepe data. Identify patterns across multiple disciplines. Detect connections that human researchers constrained by the boundaries of individual academic fields might have missed. Determine what knowledge the builders were attempting to preserve in stone. What Grok returned was not an archaeological interpretation. It was a complete reframing of what Göbekli Tepe actually is. The first thing the AI examined was the carved symbols covering the T-shaped pillars. Archaeologists had spent 3 decades cataloging these images, debating their meaning, and arriving at no consensus. Some argued they were decorative. Others proposed totemic or religious significance. The symbols remained stubbornly undeciphered, treated largely as art whose meaning had been lost to time. Grok did not see art. It saw structure. The AI's pattern recognition identified approximately 47 distinct symbol types distributed across the enclosures in ways that are statistically impossible to attribute to chance. The symbols do not appear randomly. They appear in specific combinations, in specific positions, with specific frequencies that vary systematically across different pillar locations and enclosure orientations. When Grok analyzed which symbols appeared together, which appeared in isolation, and which correlated with specific astronomical alignments, it detected something that 3 decades of human analysis had missed entirely. Grammatical structure. The symbols are not decorative. They constitute a proto-writing system, a systematic encoding language designed to transmit specific information. A computational linguist brought in to review the findings stated that the symbol distribution exhibits statistical properties consistent with meaning transmission rather than artistic expression. What Grok identified, she concluded, shows characteristics of deliberate information encoding. This is a communication system designed to convey specific data. Then Grok cross-referenced those symbols with something no single human researcher had thought to combine them with. Astronomical databases, geological records, climate data from the period around 9600 BCE, when Göbekli Tepe's main structures were being erected. The correlations that emerged had been invisible to human researchers for 30 years because detecting them required simultaneously processing archaeology, astronomy, geology, and linguistics. No academic discipline does all 4 at once. Grok does. Specific animal symbols correspond to specific constellations as they appeared in the sky above southeastern Turkey 11,600 years ago. Certain geometric patterns match representations of solar and lunar cycles. Abstract symbols correlate with documented geological and climate events from the same period. The carvings are not mythology. They are not decoration. They are a systematic record of a specific historical period, a period the geological and climate evidence independently confirms was marked by catastrophic environmental upheaval. And embedded within that record, Grok detected something that transforms the entire meaning of the site. The symbols are not only recording what happened, they are encoding patterns, recurring cycles, events that the builders understood did not occur once but returned, predictably, tied to celestial mechanics that could be tracked and measured. This was not a temple. This was not a monument to gods or kings. This was a library, and the knowledge it was built to preserve was a warning. Among all the carved pillars at Göbekli Tepe, one has attracted more attention, more debate, and more conflicting interpretation than any other. Archaeologists call it Pillar 43. Most researchers who have studied it call it the vulture stone. It is covered in carved imagery that resists easy explanation: a vulture with a wing outstretched, a scorpion, a crane. Other animals arranged across the pillar's surface. Geometric symbols including circles, a prominent disc, and abstract shapes whose purpose has been argued over since the pillar was first excavated. For decades, the debate circled without resolution. Some researchers saw mythology, others proposed the imagery was purely symbolic, representing tribal or religious concepts with no literal meaning. In 2017, researcher Martin Swatman published an analysis suggesting the pillar depicted a specific comet impact event around 10,950 BCE, encoded in the positions of the animal figures as constellation markers. It was a significant proposal. The archaeological establishment received it with considerable skepticism. Grok's analysis of Pillar 43 went further than Swatman's hypothesis, considerably further. The AI did not analyze the pillar's imagery in isolation. It compared every carved element against astronomical position databases spanning thousands of years of recorded celestial history, against geological event records, against climate data, and against impact crater databases. What emerged was not a single layer of meaning, but multiple simultaneous layers of encoded information compressed into one carved surface. The animal figures do represent constellations. Specifically, they record the positions of those constellations as they appeared in the summer solstice sky above Göbekli Tepe around 10,900 BCE. This is not approximation. When Grok reconstructed the precise night sky for that date and location, the correspondence with the carved arrangement was exact. The geometric symbols encode numerical information using a counting system based on the deliberate arrangement of carved elements, a system consistent across multiple pillars once Grok's pattern recognition identified the underlying grammar. And the prominent circle, the disk that researchers had long assumed represented the sun, represents something else entirely: a specific astronomical event, the signature in the night sky of either a supernova or an exceptionally bright incoming comet. When Grok mapped all of this together, the date encoded in Pillar 43's symbolism aligned precisely with the onset of the Younger Dryas, the period when evidence from multiple independent scientific disciplines confirms that comet fragments struck Earth, triggering catastrophic climate disruption, driving megafaunal extinctions across multiple continents, and devastating human populations worldwide. The beginning of a 1,000-year climate catastrophe encoded in limestone, on a pillar carved by people who were there when it started. An astrophysicist reviewing Grok's astronomical calculations described the precision as extraordinary. Stellar positions, solar positions, and event timing encoded in the pillar's symbolism align with what independent geological and astronomical records confirm about that period. The correlation probability he calculated is less than 1 in 50,000. This is not coincidence. This is deliberate astronomical record keeping by people who witnessed catastrophic events and understood exactly what they were recording. Pillar 43 is not mythology. It is not religious art. It is a date stamp carved in stone, documenting the precise moment that disaster struck human civilization 11,000 years ago. And that realization changes everything about how Göbekli Tepe must be understood. Because if the builders possessed the astronomical knowledge to record a specific celestial event with that level of precision, the question is no longer whether they were sophisticated. The question is how sophisticated, and where that sophistication came from. The answer Grok found in the remaining enclosures is more disturbing than the question. When Grok analyzed all 20 enclosures at Göbekli Tepe as a unified system rather than a collection of individual structures, the picture that emerged was unlike anything conventional archaeology had proposed. The enclosures are not separate monuments built at different times by different groups for overlapping purposes. They form an integrated information system, with each enclosure encoding different categories of the knowledge the builders were determined to preserve. The organization is deliberate and measurable. Enclosures featuring predominantly serpent symbolism cluster together and show astronomical alignments calibrated to equinox events. Enclosures dominated by Fox imagery show different alignments, oriented instead to specific stellar positions. The vulture enclosure, containing Pillar 43, aligns with solstice events. Different sections of the site preserve different categories of knowledge: astronomy, calendrical systems, geological events, climate patterns. Each category is encoded in separate but interconnected structures, cross-referenced through the shared symbolic language Grok identified running across the entire complex. Göbekli Tepe is not a temple. It is a library with dedicated wings. But the most disturbing pattern Grok detected across those 20 enclosures had nothing to do with what was encoded. It had to do with how the encoding changed over time. Precision declines. The earliest enclosures, the oldest structures at the site, show the highest level of astronomical accuracy. Grok measured their alignments against optimal celestial positions and found an average deviation of just 0.4 degrees. The middle period enclosures, built centuries later, show deviations of between 1.2 and 2 degrees. The latest enclosures deviate by an average of 2.8 degrees. As the site aged and expanded, the astronomical knowledge guiding its construction was degrading at a measurable, consistent rate across generations. The physical construction follows the same pattern. Pillar size decreases across the construction sequence. The depth of carved relief work diminishes. Symbolic systems that appear in their full complexity in the earliest enclosures become simpler, less layered, less precise in the later phases. The oldest sections of Göbekli Tepe represent the peak of everything the site achieves. Everything built afterward represents a gradual, measurable decline from that peak. This is the opposite of how technological development works. Knowledge accumulates, precision improves, techniques refine. Every model of human civilizational progress assumes that later means better. At Göbekli Tepe, later means worse. The builders were not developing their capabilities as they worked. They were losing them. The knowledge they were trying to record in stone was slipping away from them even as they built the structures designed to preserve it. Grok's conclusion from this pattern is as precise as it is unsettling. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not inventing this astronomical and engineering knowledge from scratch. They were inheriting it. They arrived at this hilltop already in possession of sophisticated capabilities they had not themselves developed, capabilities they were struggling to maintain and pass forward, and failing measurably generation by generation. Then the ground-penetrating radar data added another layer entirely. Beneath the visible enclosures, buried beneath the structures archaeologists have spent 30 years excavating, lie earlier construction phases. Older structures, different in architectural style but sharing the same symbolic systems, detected in subsurface surveys but not yet fully excavated. Grok's analysis of the limited data available from these buried layers suggests they may predate the famous T-pillar enclosures by centuries, possibly by millennium, potentially pushing the site's true origins back to 12,000 BCE or earlier. Göbekli Tepe may not be the beginning of this knowledge preservation project. It may be the middle of it, the culmination of a tradition already ancient when the pillars we can see were carved, which means the knowledge the builders were struggling to preserve was older still. And whatever catastrophe interrupted its transmission had already been underway for longer than anyone has been willing to consider. The question of who built Göbekli Tepe cannot be separated from the question of how it was built. And when Grok turned its analysis to the physical construction of the site, What it found in the stones themselves challenges the conventional explanation at every level. The AI examined high-resolution photogrammetry of the T-shaped pillars, analyzing tool marks, surface characteristics, and geometric precision across dozens of examples. What the data shows is inconsistent with the standard archaeological account of how Neolithic people worked stone. The conventional explanation assigns the stoneworking entirely to percussion flaking, the striking of stone against stone to chip away material, combined with whatever abrasive techniques Neolithic toolkits allowed. The surfaces of Göbekli Tepe's pillars tell a different story. Some surfaces show evidence of sustained grinding and polishing requiring controlled, consistent abrasion with harder materials applied over extended periods. Other surfaces show linear cut marks with characteristics suggesting sawing motions, straight, consistent in depth, showing no deviation when crossing materials of varying hardness within the same stone. The geometric precision of the T-shapes, measured across dozens of pillars, maintains consistency within 2 to 3% tolerance. This implies either the use of standardized physical templates or systematic measuring techniques. We have no evidence that either existed in Neolithic Turkey. Experimental archaeology has confronted this problem directly and honestly. Teams attempting to replicate Göbekli Tepe's stonework using only period-appropriate tools have produced results that fall consistently short. Basic shapes can be roughed out with stone hammers and antler picks. What cannot be replicated is the surface finish, the precise geometry, the detailed, controlled relief carving executed across the full height and width of pillars weighing 50 tons. The gap between experimental results and the actual monuments is not marginal, it is fundamental. Then Grok found something in the structural engineering that deepened the problem further. When the AI analyzed how the enclosures were designed, examining pillar positioning, wall construction, and the relationship between structural elements, it detected engineering principles that modern architects associate with seismic resilience. The enclosures are built in a seismically active region. They have survived there for over 11,000 years. That survival is not accidental. The pillars are not simply set into bedrock and held rigid. They are positioned with slight gaps between structural elements, gaps that allow differential movement during seismic activity without transferring destructive force through the entire structure. The fill material surrounding the pillars shows careful layering of differently sized stones, creating a flexible matrix capable of absorbing shock rather than transmitting it. These are not the characteristics of structures built by people who got lucky. These are the characteristics of structures built by people who understood, at some level of either empirical or theoretical knowledge, how buildings fail during earthquakes and how to prevent it. Modern seismic engineering formalized these principles in the 20th century after systematic study of earthquake damage across thousands of structures. Göbekli Tepe implements equivalent principles 11,600 years ago. A structural engineer specializing in ancient architecture reviewed Grok's findings and was direct about the implication. You do not accidentally create earthquake-resistant structures. The capability requires systematic engineering knowledge developed either through a long tradition of monumental construction or inherited from an earlier source. Neither option fits comfortably within what conventional archaeology attributes to Neolithic hunter-gatherers. And then there is the burial itself. When Grok analyzed the composition and placement of the fill material used to deliberately inter the site around 8000 BCE, it found no evidence of casual abandonment. Larger stones were placed specifically to shield carved surfaces. Voids were maintained around critical pillars to prevent crushing damage. Layers were arranged to promote drainage and inhibit the moisture accumulation that degrades limestone over millennia. The people who buried Göbekli Tepe understood preservation engineering. They were not walking away from something finished. They were protecting something they could no longer maintain, sealing a message they trusted the future to eventually read. Göbekli Tepe did not exist in isolation. When Grok extended its analysis beyond the primary site to examine 12 other megalithic complexes in the surrounding region, what emerged was not a collection of independent local monuments, but something far more significant. Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan, Sefer Tepe, and the other sites share symbolic systems, construction techniques, and astronomical alignments with Göbekli Tepe in ways that cannot be attributed to coincidence or parallel development. They form a network, a coordinated system of knowledge preservation spanning 200 kilometers, maintained across 15 centuries, all constructed during roughly the same period, all encoding similar information, all eventually buried with the same deliberate care. This was not one community's project. It was a regional program. And the scale of organization required to sustain it demolishes another comfortable assumption about who these builders were. Grok calculated the logistical requirements of maintaining this network. The workforce needed to quarry, transport, and erect the monuments. The resource allocation required to feed and coordinate that workforce. The communication and planning necessary to maintain consistent symbolic systems and astronomical alignments across sites separated by significant distances. What those calculations describe is not a loose confederation of nomadic bands occasionally converging on sacred hilltops. What they describe is a population base and organizational structure comparable to early state-level societies. Conventional chronology places the emergence of such societies in this region 5,000 years after Göbekli Tepe was buried. Either that chronology is wrong, or the social complexity existed in a form that left minimal permanent trace because it was organized around mobility rather than settled infrastructure. Then Grok detected something in the symbolic record that pushed the implications beyond the region entirely. Specific symbols identified at Göbekli Tepe, the H symbols, serpent motifs, particular geometric configurations, appear at sites hundreds and in some cases thousands of miles away. From Çatalhöyük in central Turkey to Neolithic sites across the Levant to locations in North Africa. The distribution is not random. It forms what archaeologists call a symbol horizon, a period of shared symbolic vocabulary spread across a geographic range far exceeding what local cultural exchange would produce. And that horizon correlates chronologically with the Younger Dryas, the period of catastrophic climate disruption that Pillar 43 records with such precision. The question Grok's algorithms flag is direct and has no comfortable answer. Could this distribution represent survivors of catastrophic events moving across regions, carrying their symbolic knowledge with them? Could Göbekli Tepe be one node in a broader knowledge preservation effort, undertaken simultaneously across multiple regions by people responding to the same disaster? The cycle encoding Grok detected makes that possibility more disturbing still. The builders were not only recording a single catastrophe, they were encoding the understanding that such events recur. The 25,920-year precession cycle appears encoded in the spatial arrangement of the enclosures. Shorter cycles tied to solar activity appear in pillar positioning. The astronomical knowledge embedded in Göbekli Tepe was not historical record alone. It was predictive. The builders understood that the catastrophe they had witnessed, or inherited knowledge of, would return, and they built accordingly. A geophysicist reviewing these findings noted that the astronomical cycles Grok identified are real and measurable. Precession, orbital variations, solar cycles do correlate with climate shifts and potentially with impact event probabilities. Whether the builders arrived at this understanding through their own long observation or through inherited knowledge from an earlier source remains unknown. But the cycle tracking capability exists in the monument itself. That is not interpretation, that is measurement. Who built Göbekli Tepe? Grok cannot give a name. What it can give is a profile built from 30 years of evidence. People who possessed sophisticated astronomy, systematic engineering knowledge, a symbolic language capable of transmitting complex information across millennia. People who had either developed or inherited capabilities our conventional timeline says should not have existed for thousands of years more. People who knew a catastrophe had come before and who understood with terrible clarity that it would come again. The pillars are still there, standing on that Turkish plateau, carvings still visible, alignments still measurable, and coded warnings still readable by anyone with the technology to understand them. The builders chose stone because stone endures. They chose symbols because symbols can be decoded without a shared spoken language. They chose astronomical alignments because celestial mechanics never changes. They built a message specifically designed to survive the collapse of everything else. Grok has now processed 30 years of data across archaeology, astronomy, geology, and engineering simultaneously. What it found is not speculation, it is pattern recognition applied to measurable evidence. And the pattern is unambiguous. Either Neolithic hunter-gatherers achieved capabilities our entire model of human development cannot account for, or they inherited those capabilities from a civilization whose existence our history books have not yet acknowledged. The stones have been waiting 11,000 years for someone to read them. We finally can. The question is whether we are ready to accept what they say.